I look forward to being with that group. Today, I want to begin a series of lessons that Jordan and I are going to do together, and Ryan's going to throw a lesson in there as well, that we're going to do throughout September and October. And the title of this series has to do with Forgotten Lives. We're going to look at different individuals throughout the Bible that don't get a lot of the out front attention. People who are significant and who do significant things, but are often viewed as insignificant because we don't pay much attention to them. And so we want to do some work on that kind of thing this September and October, kind of a special that we have planned to do. And this morning, I want to begin this by talking overlooked lives of significance. We all can name the people who are out front. They're obvious. And we all probably have individuals in our lives that we go back in our memory banks and we can call forth who made a profound impact or difference in our lives. And then there are those people that we intersected in life that maybe we didn't give as much thought to. But if we give time to reflect, that passing together at that time and occasion also had a great deal of meaning in our lives as well. In Exodus chapter 31 and verses 1 through 6, it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uriah, the son of Hur, and of the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God and wisdom, in understanding and knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship, to design artistic work, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, to work in all manner of craftsmanship. And I indeed have appointed with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, the tribe of Dan. I have put wisdom in the hearts of all the gifted artisans, that they make all that I have commanded you." Have you ever paid attention to these two men? Have you ever paid attention to Aholiab, and have you ever paid attention to Bezalel, these two men? And by the way, did you notice something else in this reading? There's two men mentioned by name, but then notice what he says in verse 6. "I've put wisdom in the heart of all the gifted artisans, that they may make all that I have commanded you." In the midst of introducing two obscure individuals, he leaves obscure innumerable individuals. When you turn to the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you see something very similar to what Paul will talk about in the book of in the church at Corinth. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, begin at verse 22. He said, "No much rather those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these will bestow greater honor. And our unpresentable parts have greater modesty, but our presentable parts have no need. But God composed the body, having given honor to that part which lacks it." Paul is saying that there are those in the church at Corinth that are not the out front people. They're not the people that everybody pays attention to. But he said those are the ones on whom God bestows the honor. We know the football coach. We know the quarterback. We know the star pitcher. We know the valedictorian. We know first chair. We know the state champion. We know those things. We know something about those people. But what about the people that are behind the scenes, like these two men at Exodus chapter 31? I will look at some things from 1 Samuel 23 and 1 Chronicles chapter 11. If you'd like to put a marker in those two sections of Scripture, we're going to be flipping back and forth in those throughout the lesson. But first of all, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 23. 2 Samuel chapter 23. 2 Samuel chapter 23, and I want to begin reading with you in verse 1. 2 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 1. He said, "Now these are the last words of David. Thus says David, the son of Jesse. Thus says the man raised up on high, the anointed of God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel." Notice, these are the last words of David. And he's called the sweet singer of Israel. What are the last words of David? What are going to be these last words that David is going to speak? Well, turn with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 11. 1 Chronicles chapter 11, and look at verse 9. 1 Chronicles chapter 11 and verse 9. "So David went on and became great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. Now these were the heads of the mighty men who David had strengthened themselves with him in his kingdom, with all Israel, to make him king according to the word of the Lord." Notice verse 9 says, so as it went on, David became great. At this period of time, David has slain his 10,000 and Saul has slain his thousands. And David is being regaled as a hero because of who the number that he has slain. Saul is now turned with incense against him. And it says here in 1 Chronicles chapter 11 that he begins in verse 10 and says, "These were the heads of the mighty men whom David had, who strengthened themselves." The last words of David have to do with these mighty men. In fact, if you look at chapter 12 and verse 1, chapter 12 and verse 1 through 2. "Now these were the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he was still a fugitive from Saul, the son of Kish. And these were among the mighty men, helpers in war, armed with bows, using both the right hand and the left in hurling stones, shooting arrows with their bows. They were of Benjamin, Saul's brethren." Look at verse 8, look at verse 12. Verse 12 and then verse 18. "Jonathan the 8th, Elziab the 9th. But now then look at verse 18. "Then the Spirit came upon Azamiah, the chief of the captains, when he said, 'We are yours, O David. We are on your side, son of Jesse. Peace be to you and peace be to your helpers, for your God helps us.'" And then look at verse 40. "Moreover, those who were near to them from as far as Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali were bringing food on donkeys, camels on mules, oxen, provisions of flour, cakes, figs, raisins, wine and oil, oxen, sheep abundantly, for their joy was in Israel." David begins by talking about these mighty men. And as he talks about these mighty men, David, we find, is encamped in the cave of Adullam. David is being regaled as his hero. He's not yet king. Saul is still king, but Saul is pursuing David. And as Saul pursues David, these mighty men, some 400 mighty men that David has traveling with him, some of those are captive with David in that cave where Saul comes to relieve himself. And amazingly, of all that David the commander would have to talk about, all the great battles, the battles of victory. For example, do you remember whenever he is going to build the temple? And God says to David, not chiding him, "Did I ask you to build the temple?" "No, you won't build the temple, but there will come a son after you that will build the temple." Why was David prohibited from building the temple? Because he was a man of war, a man of blood. Here is this great commander. Here is this great nation builder, David. And he's not talking about all of his conquests. He's talking about these men who made him mighty. He calls them helpers in war. Look back at 2 Samuel chapter 23. 2 Samuel chapter 23. Look at verses 8 through 12. "These are the names of the mighty men of David had. Josh-Bashebeth, the Tachmonite, chief among the captains. He was called Adino the Iznite, because he killed 800 men at one time. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo the Elhite, one of the 3 mighty men with David, when they defiled the Philistines who were gathered for battle, and men of Israel had retreated. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi the Hararite. The Philistines had gathered together into a troop There was a piece of ground full of lentils, so the people fled from the Philistines. But he stationed himself in the middle of the field, defending it, and killed the Philistines, so the Lord brought about a great victory. Wouldn't you like to have had a Dino on your side? Here's a guy that with some of his troops kills 800 men at one time. I don't know if it happened this way or not, but I can just imagine here's 800 men, and here comes a Dino, and minute by minute, 800 men are falling. But that's not good enough. What we come to is we come next of all to Eleazar. And Eleazar defied the Philistines. But that's not enough. Now we come to Shammah. And the Philistines are gathered together, the troops, and he just stands in the middle of the field, slaying all of them. And the God gave them a great victory. Look, beginning in verse 15. And David said with longing, "Oh, that someone would come and give me a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." So the three mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink, but poured it out to the Lord. And he said, "Far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore, these things were done by these three men." Of all the things that Adino did in killing 800 men at one time, Eleazar, defiling these Philistines and killing these mighty men, three of the mighty men with David, killing these Philistines, and Shammah standing in the middle of the battle. For what does David remember them? David remembers them for what? He said, "I'm thirsty." And what do these guys do? They go out with great risk to their own lives. They go out and they get David a drink of water. Why did they do that? They did that because they were selflessly devoted to him. They weren't concerned with their place among David's mighty men. They weren't concerned whether anybody would know their name. What they were concerned about was their commander. Turn back to 1 Chronicles chapter 11. 1 Chronicles chapter 11. Amazing as those three guys are, we come to verses 22 and 23 of 1 Chronicles chapter 11. Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of the valiant man from Kabzeel who had done mighty deeds, he had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And he killed an Egyptian, a man of great height, 5 cubits tall. In the Egyptian's hand there was a spear like a weaver's beam, and he went to him with a staff. Some translations say club. Wrested the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. These things Benaiah the son of Jehoiada did, and won a name among the 3 mighty men. You have Adino, you have Eleazar, and you have Shammah, but behind them are who? Behind him are these men. Here you have Benaniah. What does he do? This Benaniah, he kills 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. These are giants among them. These aren't fellows sitting in the corner drinking their coffee, taking a break because they're bivouacking somewhere else and simply handing out the goods for people. These are guys who are out fighting. And then he says, verse 23, he killed an Egyptian, a man of great height, 5 cubits tall, 7 foot 6 inches tall. Now, I don't know if Benaniah was 5 foot 7 or not, but I doubt he was 7 foot 6 inches tall. But here he is, 7 foot 6 inches tall, and what does he do? He takes the spear from the guy, and he takes the spear and runs the guy through with his spear. He didn't take a sword and slice him with a sword, which would have been easier. he takes this heavy spear this giant of a man has and slays this man. And he'd go down to what? One of the three mighty men of David. People of significance that made a difference in the life of David. Maybe you've paid attention to Benaiah before, but have you ever paid attention to Adino and Shema? We've heard of Eleazar, but only in a different context from a different Eleazar. But have we paid attention to that Eleazar? But these men protected David. These men had David's life in their hands. But they're not listed. They're not listed in Hebrews chapter 11. They're not listed in the great halls of faith in other passages. These, though, were people of significance. The second thing I want you to see is that people of significance make a difference. People of significance make a difference. June 6, 1944. Does that date ring a bell with anybody? June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were assaulted by American troops, invaded by American troops. Over 9,000 lives were killed that day. 9,387 lost their lives. There on Point du Hoc of Normandy, you have the crosses scattered across that piece of land. And under that piece of land lie approximately 5,000 individuals. Individuals whose names today we don't know. But individuals who are significant because those individuals, like these mighty men, fought so we could be free. But we don't know their names. But what they did was significant. Turn with me to Acts chapter 12, Acts chapter 23. There's an event in Acts chapter 23. I don't know if you've ever paid much attention to or not, but it's one of these kind of obscure events in the book of Acts that Luke just kind of mentions as he passes by some of the events that happened in the life of Paul. But I think it's worth noting in the consideration that we're making of these forgotten lives. It says in verse 11 of Acts chapter 23, "But the following night the Lord stood by him. Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear" what? "Witness at Rome. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither drink nor eat till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, 'We've bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near.' So when Paul's sister's son heard the ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, 'Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him.' So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, 'Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you.' Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, 'What is it that you have to tell me?' And he said, 'The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they're ready, waiting for the promise for you.' So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, 'Tell no one that you have revealed these things. Has anybody ever found the name of Paul's nephew? Have you ever paid attention to what Paul's nephew just did? If you go back to verse 11, God makes this promise, be of good cheer, Paul, as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome. Now, that's what God is promising Paul, but how is that going to happen if there's a conspiracy that's there and on the way, seemingly innocent things taking place, he's going to be ambushed and killed? I think that's one of those non-miraculous providential things that happen in the life of Paul. But do you see what happens to this young man? This young man comes, and because of what this young man does, he saves the life of the Apostle Paul, Paul's nephew. The gospel was not written for out front people. The church is not about out front people. The church is about nobody saved by somebody. And that somebody can make somebody out of nobodies. The church is not about who the preacher is. The church is about those people who may be the lesser parts that Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 12, that may be the obscure nephew that's behind the scenes doing the work that make a significant difference in a local congregation. In fact, I would have heard that there's no congregation that exists without these kind of individuals, without these individuals like these mighty men that we don't know, and without a man like this young man that is Paul's nephew. Or correspondingly, young women or women who get no outward attention, who don't get the out front attention. You know, when we have the youth blast at the first of the year, the young men get to lead the prayers, the young men get to lead the songs, the young men conduct the services. But when the high school kids arrange that whole thing, the girls are involved, but the girls aren't out front. But those girls are pivotal to what takes place. They're significant to what happens. Nobodies who are significant, but also nobodies that have a lasting significance, that make a lasting difference and have a lasting significance. Perhaps you're familiar with the story that Richard Matheson wrote called The Incredible Shrinking Man. The main character in that story is named Scott Carey. He's about 6 foot tall, an amazing individual. He's a brilliant scientist, and he thinks that he has discovered the cure for whatever is going to be the disease that man needs to be cured. But the problem is, as he is experimenting, he is affected by the experiment. And the incredible shrinking man is just what happens to Scott Carey. He begins to shrink bit by bit. Until finally, minuscule at one point, just a speck, he goes out after eating, lays down at night, looks up at the stars expecting to die. But as he looks up to the stars, he sees the immensity of all that God had created. He sees the stars sprinkled across the satin blue sky. And all of a sudden, he comes to realize that we all are but a speck in the universe of God. And that when we have God's perspective of us, it's not the king. It's not the out front. It's that all of us share one thing in common. We all are specks. We all are nobodies. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10, I know that you're familiar with this, but I want to point something out I think is significant in this reading. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Notice what God does with those specks who are nobodies. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a what? A chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Notice now, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. God takes those specks in the universe who were what? Who were nobodies, and He makes them into somebodies. Those who are not a people, He now makes a people. Who what? Those kind of people make a lasting significance and make a lasting difference in our lives. God is the one who defines us. God is the one that makes us somebody. Apart from God, we're all obscure. Apart from God, we all have no meaning and no purpose. But God can take the most obscure, the least among us, and make that person significant, and make that person where they can have a difference, and enable that person to have a lasting difference in our lives. So the question comes, what kind of characteristics does that kind of person have that we've learned of? What can we share in common with regard to this kind of individual? Let's look at 4 traits of these significant individuals. Well, I'll just cover them. They vanished. First of all, the first thing we see from the 3 mighty men is individuals who make a significant difference have selfless devotion. Have selfless devotion. They're more concerned with others than they are with themselves. In that same text we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul said, considering others before considering yourself. Just as those 3 mighty men with David, they considered David before they considered themselves. They are filled with selfless devotion. The second thing that makes them significant is they are focused on their objective. They keep the main thing the main thing. They don't let things distract them. Their attentions are not distracted from what their purpose is. They understand their purpose. Though they may be insignificant, they understand what their purpose is. And then third, I want you to see that what they do is not only do they have selfish devotion, not only are they people who are focused on what the task is. These are people who, as you look in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 are described. He describes them having one heart and one soul and one mind. Look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Paul will talk about how his joy is fulfilled. And it's fulfilled by having people who are like-minded. And notice how he describes these people who are like-minded. If any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord and of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for others and their own interests, but also for the interests of others. Their primary consideration is the interest of others. Go back to 1 Chronicles again, this time chapter 12. I want you to look at 1 Chronicles chapter 12 and verses 38 through 40, and I want you to notice how Paul describes these individuals. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 38. All these men of war who could keep ranks came to Hebron with a loyal heart to make David king over Israel. And all the rest of Israel, notice, were of one mind to make David king. And they were there with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their brethren had prepared for them. Moreover, those who were near to them from as far away as Issachar and Zebulun and so forth, as we read earlier. Notice how David describes them. These people have come together with one heart, one soul, and one mind. For what? For one particular focus. For one particular objective. They came selflessly with that objective to what? To make David the king. That was their motive. And then we find not only were these individuals selfless, not only were these individuals enabled to keep the main thing, keep themselves focused, and not only were they of one heart, one soul, and one mind, they asked themselves the question, do I want to be significant or renowned? Do I want to be significant or do I want to be renowned? And how we answer that question has to do with how we relate to one another. If I just want to be significant helping others, being renowned is not going to be important. But if what is important to me is being renowned and being out front, I'm not going to be willing to offer myself for others. And then they ask the question, the time that I spend to be significant, do I want to be concerned with the quality of the impact or the size of the impact? What kind of impact do we want to make in the world? Are we concerned with the quality of the impact or the size of the impact? Think about the impact Paul's nephew made. Think about the impact the three mighty men of David made. They weren't concerned with the size of the impact. They were concerned with the quality of the impact. In the church, am I concerned with being renowned because of the impact I'm making, being renowned, the size of it? Or am I concerned with just simply being significant with the quality of the impact that I'm making? Forgotten lives who make a difference. We're going to take a look at these individuals. And I hope as we look at them, we'll see some traits and attributes that are worthy of our consideration. Let's bring this full circle to Jesus then. For whom did he come? The righteous? The scribes, the Pharisees? For whom did he come? He came for the sinner. He came from the nobodies to make them into somebodies. He came demonstrating selfless devotion, doing all things always that please the Father.